No. Okay, let me.
I don't know if it's in a unit in economics.
No. But okay, I think by wheelbarrownomics, you Casper is referring to the debate of the moment, and the debate of the moment, or what people call the national question today. The debate of the moment is: look, this is a country going to almost 60 years of independence, after independence rather, in 63, and one of the things that has happened is Kenya is one of the most unequal countries. I mean, when we all had independence, everybody was almost equally poor. I mean, most, and so we see some certain families or a set of people who've acquired enormous wealth. Some of them have never woken up in the morning and worked a full day of their lives. So it brings in this argument that there are some dynasties, and then there are the rest of Kenya. So I think what wheelbarrownomics is trying to refer to, while of course it's one political faction in Jubilee, is that the differences in wealth in Kenya are not created by people who have worked for it. And so the political discussion we should be having is whether that level of inequality is unacceptable. And it isn't. So it's not for me to say why somebody else who lives in a house that the government of Kenya constructed for almost $1 billion shillings should be claiming that that Kenyans should be asking government or asking some dynasties why they have. I think it's a clever thing. It's a discussion Kenyans need to have about the discussions about the differences, the huge differences that have been created either by government policy or by people who have had access to wealth, whether through land that is not accounted for by the work that they've done. So the huge differences that exist in Kenya, which of course can be politically exploited and also create differences between people, is one that should be requested. I just think that some of the people who are asking that question, who are themselves members of Jubilee, which has also driven the greatest inequality among Kenyans, do not have legitimacy to ask that question. But as Kenyans, we should sit and ask ourselves, and an economy of this kind is unsustainable, where all you do is we use government and access to government as an opportunity to build wealth for specific few at the expense of many. I think it's a question Kenyans, and we should not run away from that problem as a class problem, what it means for it. We shouldn't, except that we should not have it as a way of resolving the political differences between Jubilee principles. I think that is something they should sit in a room and discuss among themselves, because they got themselves elected in 2 terms. But the differences that exist in Kenya, and whether they are real, and how government spends money in a way that drives inequality further between people, or directs through public procurement income to the relatives, friends and associates of politicians, on people in the executive generally, is a discussion that Kenyans should have.
All right. Mheshimiwa, government keeps borrowing. Right? I've always wondered, a government is like a home. If you cannot afford bread, you don't have to go and borrow more money to buy bread and margarine. Right? So it means you are in a circular level of, you go and borrow from kiosk A to come and fix the debt we are at kiosk B. The government, is it not possible to adhere, to formulate its economic, its budgetary policies around what it has collected? What's so difficult about that?
Let me start by saying there's nothing intrinsically wrong with borrowing. I mean, you can borrow. We all borrow. That's okay. The question really is, to what level do you borrow? Do you borrow to the point where it's no longer sustainable, you cannot service that debt? And so then if you borrowed, then your house gets auctioned, your car is mortgaged, and then ultimately you are declared bankrupt. So the question today, I think, for Kenyans is the government has reached borrowed to the level where now it's broke. And it's soon or later be declared bankrupt. For a government, that would mean it has defaulted on its loans, as we've seen in other countries. It's on loans, they can't service it when it's due, and so then you face consequences. You'll have to pay more premium in future if you want to borrow. You may not be allowed to borrow again, or you discourage investments into the country. But so the question is, why do we get into this level? I think it's about lack of several things. One, I think, is obviously it's for this government, for example, it's their policy. They've always taken this view that the debt, even today, they're still arguing that it's sustainable. And I give an example.
They keep raising
I gave an example of the majority leader who just said a couple of days ago that we can take it even to 20, because if it's going to be used for development, you can borrow. So the challenge is, that is one. Two, there is inability to try and do budgeting the way it must be done. You budget, your expenditure side must be based on your revenues. This is the way budgets. Governments finance ministers used to struggle to balance their budgets. And that is the thing you look at. Where are they going to get it? How are they going to balance it? Now it's no longer important. You simply say, my expenditure is 3 trillion. And what is my revenue? It's 1. Yes, the difference I borrow. It's so simple. They're no longer thinking about it. And so we've gone into a situation where now our revenues are about 1.8 trillion. We are going to spend 1 trillion shillings to service debt this year, 2021. What is left is hardly enough to cover even half of the government's recurrent expenditure. Forget about development, forget about other things. So we are in a situation where now the government has said they are going to borrow money to service some of the loans that are maturing. So it's in a debt trap. They can tell you every language, whatever, but when the government will go out next to collect a euro bond or something, it's to service the loan that is due, that is maturing. And that's happening, and we can see it. But still, even with all these challenges, this government is still digging. They're still borrowing. And we don't know who will tell them stop, because Parliament is the one that has said, we can go ahead, please. And they're not borrowing for development. Let no one cheat you. Our development budget last year was about 350 billion. Find out how much the government borrowed. It borrowed nearly 1 trillion. In fact, they're borrowing about 3 billion now a day. 2.83 billion per day. And they're only spending 350 billion is what they want into development. Most of it not going to be actually absorbed by the time the financial year ends.
So if you want to be an overnight billionaire, you open a bank for government. You lend to government.
Well, they have borrowed from commercial banks. I mean, a few years ago when this Jubilee came to power, I think the commercial loans were about a third, isn't it? About 60. Yeah. Today, I think most of almost 2/3 of our loans are commercial, because it's easy. You walk to Chinese Exim Bank and say, I want a road. You don't even need to say. You just get China roads and bridges. Say we want to build a road from Nairobi to where? To Nyeri. It is going to be 20 billion. China road and bridges. They'll come up with the proposal. They'll do the design. They'll go to their bank and borrow the money.
Then you will
and that's it. And the loan goes into your books. And I think this is a pity that we are really, most of our business projects, big projects, are contractor driven. And this was what Angular leasing was about. And I remember when I was in the National Assembly and we went through that, we investigated that thing. And the current president was the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. And we went all the way to London to interview Gidongo. And in our report that we submitted and adopted by Parliament was a recommendation that we should never again, as a government, approve any contractor or supply financed projects. But Jubilee, everything from the dams to the roads to the railways, it's all contractor driven. And I think unless we stop this, and this is why it's easy to collect the loans. This is why this huge quantity of loans, that's why we moved away from the IDA loans and ended up where we are. And so it's, you mentioned, it's about, these commercial loans have opportunity for kickbacks, which IDA loans don't have. And so we are in a crisis, we are in a hole, and we are digging. So we pray that the hole does not collapse on us.
What's interesting is, you're saying when you want a loan, you don't even have to say anything. You just have to show up in the banks. There's someone in the commercial banks who was telling me that when you see a government official from Treasury, you know he need a loan. And you see, just a government official walking in from treasury, unajua, hey, hii ni pesa wamekuja kuomba. So maybe Uhuru only needs to show up in China. He doesn't have to say anything. And they know. This one, he wants alone. All right, sir. Even as we talk about that, KWAME. Now, where we take this money, and it's quite unfortunate what Mheshimiwa Billow is mentioning, that a majority leader who sits in parliament, who is supposed to play an oversight role, like you're saying, to oversight the executive and tell them, no, man, you're crossing all the lines. He's the one who's telling us, by the way, we can raise this thing. As long as we're talking development, that's what we have a problem with, where the money is going to, because there's no guarantee of return from where we put in these investments. We're putting them in infrastructure. At the end of the day, look, for instance, at the expressway. We say that it was a funded project. Today, we are compensating people land using taxpayers' money. You know? I mean, you look at it and you wonder, what is the common sense in this? I think the only motivation is the kickbacks, 10% from, we give from these other companies. And then now, look at recurrent. You borrow money to pay salaries. You do a budget, you sit in a corner, make a budget of yours, and you don't have money. Napiga budget nafikisha 500,000, then unakuja na bakuli. Nasema sasa nyinyi wewe leta, and you have a loan from every other neighbor. If you are in government, KWAME, this money we are borrowing, where do you think actually could put this money? Because like Billow says, I think looks like we are in a beauty contest. We want to look so good. We want to expressways. You want to have highways and all these things. We want to have things for the newspapers. Although Tanzania alikuwa anatuchongoa sema tuleta praying mantis from China for the SGR. If you're in government, where would you put the priorities in terms of loans? Where would you put the money?
I don't think we should go for loans. I don't think we should. Because as you've said, it's a dangerous dance that Kenya has started, and one of those is to build infrastructure. So, for instance, if you think about the expressway, and you're told that the expressway is a PPP, which is basically a public-private partnership, and the partner is supposed to be putting up some money. From the construction, we just try to do a scaling by asking ourselves, a similar construction done in South Africa, a similar construction, one was done in Slovak Republic, taking those numbers and trying to, because this construction is a 25, 30 kilometers road, that thing should not have cost more than 16 billion. The amount that is being quoted for that thing is about 73, I think, or 74. Suggesting that we are building it at 4.5 times what it would cost. And so what's the difference?
It's one of the most expensive expressways.
Yes, in the world. So in the first place, that just tells you there's some mischief. Now, the person who's constructing it is constructing it and has also been given guarantees by government, which means that if it fails to meet the traffic flow that was required,
the government will pay.
The government will pay. Oh. And I can tell the traffic flow that was required has actually been, those numbers are fake. I mean, let me say this without fear of contradiction, because if you look at the number of the traffic that takes place, yes, the traffic that is even projected that we even have today between JKIA and Westlands on a daily basis alone, right? That road assumes that 50% of that traffic will pass to the expressway. Unlikely. Especially if you're going to be charging people, how much would it be? 1,000 shillings for something? Yes, 600. Yes, 600 shillings. It's unlikely. So there's just something about those numbers that reminds me of SGR. When SGR was being calculated, the volume of cargo that was being assumed would pass in itself was so. It's as if we've decided to one mistake, and instead of stopping with a serious mistake at SGR, we are repeating it in different configurations everywhere else. And who will we leave with the bowl, as you said? It'll be back to the taxpayer who will have to pay without. So obviously, there's just something wrong about the way it was scaled. Yeah. Even if the logic of an expressway made sense, because you need to provide an option for people who want to travel faster, whatever might be, and everything else. But to have raised that thing from about 14, 15, 16 billion right now to looking at 70s, and by the time they finish, it'll probably be at 80 or thereabouts, tells you that something wrong has gone with the way these roads are designed and the way they talk costing. So if I was to ask today, the first thing that I would do is actually just freeze borrowing for the time being. The only borrowing you'd have to do is borrowing that allows us to stretch the tenure of loans. Because right now, if you're paying $1 trillion per year and you're collecting 1.3, it means you need some kind of bridging finance, which is basically to stretch the tenure of loans so that you're able to pay for yourself. But this infrastructure borrowing that we've gone crazy on, I mean, people are high on something that I do not know, and I should not mention on national radio, but people are high on something that, to be honest, something that definitely might not even be legal, but
there's something people
people just wake up every day and they want to construct something. So that's the unfortunate thing. So
loan is an opium. I don't know what it is. The more you have, the more you want.
I don't know what it is, but obviously there's just something that's and obviously it's easy, because who is left with the bill? The taxpayer. It's easy. If any of these things depended on the people who are making that decision, say for instance, if you told them, if project didn't work, we will never pay you your pension, for instance, I mean, those projects would have a completely different color. But as it is right now, let's construct fast and think about how Kenyans will pay for it later.
And the thing is, I think Mheshimiwa Kwame has mentioned something that the designing or the need for expressway might have made sense. For me, I don't think it really made sense. For a common mwananchi, what do you need to go and rush to do in Westlands? That you need to pay 600 for. For a mwananchi that cannot afford matatu, why do I need to rush to Westlands? From JKI, I just need to show up in Westlands and I've lost 600 shillings. And you wonder what motivates investments when you talk about these PPPs and all that. There has been an argument that the road ends somewhere where there's an investment that is coming up. It's rumored to be could be the biggest economic center in Nairobi, and you wonder, when decisions are being made on investments, especially PPPs, do we have the public good in this? What motivates these decisions in Kenya?
There's a legal framework around PPPs, but like in all other government initiatives, there has to be public participation, and I think this is where government always takes advantage of Kenyans. That the level of public participation, if at all, is ridiculously low, or actually it's the wrong people, or it's done in the wrong way, so that there is no meaningful, serious public participation. Because the idea, this is something that underpins our Constitution, 2010, that in every action the government takes, not just political, economic, or whatever, in every aspect of our lives, there has to be public participation. And the intention is so that it's what public wants that the government must do. That's the whole idea, the concept of public participation. But you get into a situation where counties say we are taking, we've done a public participation on BBI. They've called a dozen guys into a room. The government will say we have done public participation on the expressway. They have done in some 5-star hotel for a few guys. And so really it misses that fundamental objective, which is to really find out whether it meets the needs of the people. Now I would disagree with you that there are certain things which are necessary. For example, if you are a businessman or if you are somebody who lives in Nairobi, you might want to get a road that would limit the level of traffic jams and the man hours spent and the inefficiencies. That is important. That's why roads and railways and this infrastructure for transport is provided for in cities and so forth. But I think what you are saying is about prioritization. When you are putting up this thing, is it a priority relative to other needs in this country? There are parts of this country where there is no water to drink. There are parts of this country where the people have no food. Food insecurity is a major problem. And so in terms of, the prioritization, are we really, is that what the government needs to do today? Can it wait relative to the other needs? I think in that case, yes, you're right. And this is why that I'm saying that not just public participation, but that's why institutions like Parliament is there. Because they look at all that when they
Parliament.
Yeah, because, let me tell you, when you are prioritizing, it must be towards a certain development agenda of the government, which in itself, government here, takes into account Parliament, because Parliament is the one that represents people. Government is about people. So I agree with you that the government misses most of the time. Our challenge is misplaced priorities in government, and this is what underpins the problems that we're having in our economy. It's misplaced priorities. We have the resources, but how are we spending it? You go and read the newspaper and see how government is spending money every day. And then you wonder why is this government behaving this way? And it's a poor country. You think this is not third world country where people are half the population is poor and they can't put food on their table. But so that is the challenge. It's misplaced. Nothing has changed really in terms of the way the government operates, in terms of their priorities, and that is the biggest challenge of this government and the ones that we have had.
All right. We finish in the next 10 minutes. I want to throw in some questions. Maggie Mbogo, the president of Women Chamber of Commerce, is asking, where do all the levies and taxes leave women? Women don't start business for fun. They start them for survival. I think we all started for survival, but I don't know. Maybe you can answer that.
Well, yes. Okay, so most of our discussion today has focused on the fitness of our tax system to the kind of businesses that exist in Kenya. And obviously, a majority on small and micro enterprises, and especially some of those in the informal sector, are actually owned by women. So obviously, the taxation system and the levies that whether counties or national government applies disproportionately apply to women because they're the ones who run the smaller businesses and all that. So yes, Maggie, that's part of the issue, and I think that's why a voice like yours is important for this discussion. The point for me is taxation is a given because it's required in the sense that the Constitution allows it. The public financing government activity would not be possible without resources, and so government needs to pay. But I think the way in which taxes apply in Kenya, in which you're paying multiple levies at different times, you're paying for different licenses at different times, and you're paying for other taxes and everything else, is not fit for any business, whether they are large, but large businesses are able to absorb them because they'll get more people to be able to work out that. And then obviously they're particularly debilitating for smaller businesses, and especially for the businesses that women, small and micro enterprises, and also the businesses that women run. So that's part of why this conversation is. But if you have a government that always believes that if you build an expressway as a legacy project, or that it will pay for itself, or if you build an SGR, or if you build all manner of roads and infrastructure, necessarily without asking, okay, what is its effect on the livelihood of Kenyans? You're only thinking about what the picture will look like, Nairobi will look like with expressways and freeways all over.
And you go and feel good about it.
Then yes. And,
you
yes.
don't care.
So then that's part of why this conversation needs to be actually expanded. And I think we also need to be a little bit more assertive by asking ourselves is, so for instance, you have in Nairobi less than 40% of houses, less than 40% of houses in Nairobi have a sewer system, so sanitation systems. But we are trying to build a huge expressway, which in my view, whose capacity will probably not even reach 50% of it. I think the way prioritization takes place is also an essential argument to have. In the same city where many people who work in industrial area doing very important jobs can't afford to drive on public service vehicles and actually walk to work either in the morning or in the evening because they can't pay their fare both ways. So prioritization around how people live in the city is an important thing. And if you think about that relative to what the other taxes, I mean, all the other things that national government and also the county government is investing in, we have we need to be a little bit more assertive as citizens about some of the things that represent the interests of who wants a contract or who just wants a city because they were in Singapore and decided this looks nice, let's have it in Nairobi.
They don't care the process of getting it Singapore. It is.
Yeah.
Now, Olenet says, I wish they did double carriageways with 4 lanes, both sides from Mombasa to Malaba, as an I-5 roads, interstate roads in US, instead of doing SGR, as the returns could be immense. Hamed Mohamed Somo says, Mohamed Abdullah, thanks for raising this. Once completed, I'll give you my PhD research on the subject. No, tumeanza shule hapa haraka sana. Olenet says, amazing conversation. I cry for my motherland. The ROI on most of the infrastructure done as negative trajectory on economy in the long term. All right. Now, finally, there's something here that's being sold, BBI, constitutional amendments. That is being, the proponents are lauding it as an economic masterstroke. Like, let's pass it. You guys, asubuhi, 7:30 asubuhi, after you pass this thing, the economy will be flying. Will be flying like an eagle. Can you legislate economic growth overnight? A good friend, really. You've been in government. You've started where policies are made. Can you overnight legislate? Do you have magic in constitutional changes in economy?
Of course, this is politics. I mean, you can see it. The BBI bill is about amendments to the Constitution. And nothing in those amendments talk about how or specific economic policies or economic provisions related to the economy that would make things different tomorrow when the bill is passed. More importantly, in the other wider BBI report, there's also nothing specific in the administrative and other policy matters that they can act on with before even the referendum, where which addresses the economy. Nothing. So with regards to the economy, that we will become it will take us to the middle income or countries, or we'll go to emerging nations of all those things have been said by the proponents, but I think it's all hogwash. It's all politics. There's nothing in this BBI that would change the economic architecture or the economic. There's nothing, absolutely, in my view. I've talked about this and written about this, and I don't think BBI addresses issues of the economy. And there's nothing that stops the government from doing any of these economic activities or policies that they want to do tomorrow morning. It's just that there isn't. Absolutely, there isn't. They have not even said. The least they could have said, which is easy, and they could put in the bill, is say we should not borrow.
That should have been
beyond a certain percent. They have not even said that. So I haven't seen anything, or even taxes. They have not said this BBI. Yes, no tax on unga. At least that would have said, send a message that those of us who are eating unga would nothing. So how would you say then that BBI addresses the economy? It's absolute nonsense. I don't think that is the case.
Good brother KWAME, you've been in economic schools. Explain to us how a document is going to transform the economy overnight.
Okay, let me say this: the BBI. Reading the bill, the BBI has some good stuff. He has bad stuff, and it has some very ugly stuff. Yes. Like every policy document, it tends to have a mixed picture. So what the thing I have to say is that, as Billow said, it's true. There's no economic problem that Kenya has today that the BBI would solve just by being passed. And the way it was sold out and the alacrity with which its supporters went about trying to bribe county governments, or rather county assemblies, to ensure, or proposing some incentives to county assemblies, suggests to me what is wrong with government and why it would not solve the problem. The idea that instead of reasoning things, you actually excite legislators, whether at county government level or national government level, with parks on the public bill, right? You give them cars for free, which the public pays for. That way of playing around with people's taxes in itself suggests that the good faith that anybody might have had basically should just disappear. I think it's being sold in a very, very bad way. Now, it's not going to solve all problems. The unfortunate thing, again, is even if BBI fails, and there's a likelihood for that, the problems that we have today are also not going to be solved. They'll still stay. And so, yes, our view at the IEA is not to be obsessed with whether BBI passes or not, because even if it does, it's just going to let us know that, well, you can get an incomplete or a bad law passed, you change the constitution, but you still have to wake up the next morning to solve the problems that Kenya has. So I think that's the idea about why it's a complicated thing, in the sense that it will be subjected to a referendum. Whichever way it goes, we'll wake up one day. We'll
also need a loan,
but we'll still need to. No, look, let's be honest. The BBI. Okay, let me tell you one of the things that I think about the BBI that has been missold. If you look at the Building Bridges initiative, the problem with the Building Bridges initiative are not the economic implications of what it does. So we calculated at the Institute of Economic Affairs. To be honest, according to the Constitution, there's a violation of the 2/3 principle. And the last Chief Justice actually called Parliament to it. The President did not heed, which means that he's disrespecting an existing constitution. What worries me is, why would he respect a new one just because it's come under the BBI of guys? But the point is this: if you want to look at the ugly part of BBI, it is not the economic part. The ugly part of BBI is there are very loose prescriptions within the BBI. So, for instance, any commissioner of police, the commissioner of police or any person is allowed to delegate their powers to anybody that they choose. Those are very dangerous prescriptions that actually affect our rights under the civil rights. There's also the other prescriptions around a parliament that will now have both executive and the parliament on one side, which is one of the things that had been a problem which Kenyans were trying to solve with this constitution in 2010, which was to keep parliament aside so that parliament can do its oversight functions and keep the executive aside. Now it's been mixed up with the president having a foot on both sides and being able to influence MPs one way or the other. So what we know today as separation of powers, but also what we know today as parliament's obligation to check on the executive, will actually collapse under BBI. Now, the economics part about whether you hire an additional 150 women to balance that number, remember, people are forgetting it. It's actually an experiment for 3 election cycles. So after 3 election cycles, that rule will actually disappear under BBI, which is something that we should be fair by giving them the impression. So yes, it could raise additional spending by close to about between 0, if we elect enough women, to actually closer to about 270 million per month. That's a lot of money by no deed. But it's not the biggest problem that Kenya has in terms of public finance today. The problem is that your average member of parliament earns most of his income, right? The part that he pays tax on, which is about 700,000 shillings, that he pays tax on. The rest come in the form of allowances and the kind of grants that the president can decide one day to convert one grant into the other. So if we don't manage that, whether we have BBI or not, if we don't manage the way members of parliament are able to claw through the honey jar, giving themselves all manner of allowances, and the SRC not stopping them, then that's a bigger problem in my view than the BBI. Or rather than the prescriptions of the BBI regarding new members of parliament.
Right. The same people that we have, you're talking about nominated, the few that we're having are already being used to manipulate policy within the assembly. So you can only imagine what they can do with over 200 nominated ones. They can always sue.
That's an unfair argument. That's an unfair. No, that's an unfair argument because remember that we have a specific prescription under Article 27. I mean, or rather, yes, for the 2/3 gender rule. So we can decide, if we do not have the 2/3 gender rule, that we think it is not important to adhere to it, then those who are opposed to BBI, and I think they have a right to do that, should come back and tell us, then let's suspend this rule, so that we will not have to add 150 at the maximum, and another 155 other people. And people are assuming it's women. It can be any gender, right? Because if more women get elected, then men would need to actually be brought in for that.
Even all of them, men and women, are still manipulated. Anyway, I hope in good faith, I was hoping that in good faith in the coming, we are I think, a couple of months to the reading of the budget, another financial year. So I could wish that in good faith, maybe the government should start by allocating the 35% to counties. And at least so that we get a feeling. Watuonjeshe kidogo the new dispensation. Your final remarks, Mheshimiwa Billow?
No, they don't have the money to give the 35% based on the last revenue audited by the Treasury, which would be in the tune of 700 billion. You want to give to the counties? I don't think that would be practical. These are all sweeteners put into to encourage. But I think, in my view, I think our political leaders, particularly those who are vying for the high seats, need to focus more on the economy of this country. Because if they don't, at some time in future they'll pay a price when the situation gets out of hand. Today we are worried about wheelbarrows and things and so forth, but it will come to a point where it will not be possible to, because of this way, because the situation on the ground is really pretty bad. I mean, people, jobs have been lost, livelihoods and so forth, and the effects of the pandemic is still there in a huge way. And so government needs to really look at things differently. We need a complete paradigm shift in the way the government looks at its budget, which you said is coming up. Let's not just look at the formal sector and the government looking for money to build things. I think they need to look at Kenyans and their livelihoods and how to better them. And they can do a lot. And the other countries with much smaller budget, their shilling counts. If it's 1 shilling, that 1 shilling, it goes, they put priorities. We have always talked about prioritization. If you look at the budget policy this year, it keeps talking about rationalizing and prioritization. But in reality, then when you go to the estimates, nothing much changes. We have a problem with that. So I think, in my view, the leaders need to really focus on the economics of the ordinary Mwananchi, how to deal with those people. I think that is where I would leave it off.
All right. As we close, Kwame, what do you expect to see in the coming budget?
Okay. Yes, I think a little bit. I think many of them would actually be still a little bit of fumbling. Partly the belief that we should run the race, continue to blame COVID, which is not true. I think COVID just reminded us that, look, we've been living beyond our means, and obviously for that reason, there's this pressure that exists. But my fear is a crash landing, because if there's a hard landing, because the debt problem is not going to get any better for the time being, if behavior doesn't change. If a crash landing takes place, it'll be terrible, because it'll force the kind of reforms that government could start now by admitting to, look, we have challenges. We will not blame them on COVID. We will take responsibility for it and try to adjust decisively, especially rationalizing expenditure, cutting out the spending, because there's no reason why, having conceded 3 weeks ago, President Kenyatta conceded that we waste 2 billion shillings, or rather we lose 2 billion shillings in corruption. He should still base, the cabinet secretary should base this year's budgets on another 2 billion that's still going to be lost every day for the rest of the year. I mean, that's just irresponsibility. So if Parliament does not call him out to, look, okay, the 2 billion that you said is lost, please take it off the budget so that Kenyans don't have to pay you taxes of 700 billion, and then now manage with what you have, it just means that everybody have accepted this charade, and we're just playing games with each other for the time being. That's the unfortunate thing, because when a hard landing comes, and it's starting to come, we will hand over most of the reins, or we will look like certain institutions globally that people do not like in Kenya will be reading the riot act to the treasury. Wow. So I'd rather we get the handle on it before we have something.
And it gets to another hand. Anyway, thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming. It was a pleasure to have you. James Mwenda, the president does not respect the current constitution. Why would he respect the new one? So Alanyeti, thank you so much for the tacklers who have been with us. We really appreciate. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for always making this your favorite morning show. It was a pleasure to have you. We hope to see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye and take care. This is The Tackle, and The Tackle ends now. Signing out. Bye-bye.